The crowd at the church went silent as the groom's voice cracked through the microphone. "I can't do this," he said, staring at the trembling bride. Laughter rippled from the guests, phones came out, and whispers turned cruel. 26-year-old Grace Miller stood frozen in her white lace gown, eyes glistening, heart splitting, as he muttered, "She's not what I expected. She's too big." Her bouquet hit the marble floor, and just as humiliation burned through her, a stranger in a gray flannel jacket, holding his little boy's hand, stepped out from the back pew and said, "You're out of your mind, son. That woman's the most beautiful person in this room. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more videos like this. Let's begin." Grace didn't move. The sound of gasps, camera clicks, and murmurs swirled around her like a cruel storm. Her makeup ran, not from tears, but from disbelief. This couldn't be real. Not after 2 years of planning, saving, dreaming. The man she thought she'd build a life with had just humiliated her in front of everyone. Family, friends, even strangers who came to witness love. "Ethan, what are you saying?" she whispered, voice cracking. Her hands trembled as she gripped her bouquet tighter, petals falling onto the white floor like pieces of her heart. "I'm sorry, Grace," he muttered, his tone void of emotion. "I just can't marry someone who doesn't take care of herself." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. His mother looked proud, his friends smirked, and someone in the back actually laughed. Grace's lips parted, but no words came. She wasn't angry, she was empty. The church lights seemed to dim, the world narrowing to the sound of her own pulse. Then a calm, steady voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." Everyone turned. A man stood near the back, rugged but clean, his flannel sleeves rolled up to his elbows. In one hand, he held a small boy, maybe 6 years old, blue-eyed, dressed in a tiny vest. The man's jaw was set, his tone sharp but kind. "You don't talk to someone like that. Not here, not anywhere." Ethan frowned. "Who even are you?" The man walked forward, slow and deliberate. "Someone who knows what it's like to lose a good woman because he was too blind to see her worth." Grace blinked, tears blurring her vision. The man stopped beside her, pulling a clean handkerchief from his pocket and offering it silently. "You don't owe him another tear," he said softly. She stared at him, at his steady eyes, his kind smile, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safety. The boy tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, "why is the lady crying?" The man crouched, meeting his son's gaze. "Because sometimes, buddy, people forget what real beauty looks like." A hush fell over the room. The little boy looked up at Grace and said innocently, "You look like a princess." Grace's throat tightened. That one sentence broke the tension better than any argument could. Ethan scoffed, muttering something under his breath, but no one cared anymore. The congregation's sympathy shifted, away from the shallow groom and toward the trembling woman, who still stood strong, despite the storm. Grace wiped her tears and looked at the stranger. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave a faint smile. "Don't thank me. Just don't let that man decide your worth." Outside, the air was crisp. The autumn leaves scattered across the church steps as Grace walked out, barefoot, her heels left behind on the altar. The stranger followed quietly, his son skipping beside him. "You don't have to follow me," she said, her voice soft but shaky. "I'm not," he replied. "I just didn't want you walking out of there alone." She exhaled, the weight on her chest easing just a little. "You really didn't have to step in back there." He shrugged. Someone needed to. Name's Jack Lawson. My son, Tyler. She smiled weakly. Grace. Jack nodded. Grace suits you. They walked toward the small parking lot where guests whispered and stared. Her family avoided her gaze. Ethan was already posing for pity photos with his mother. Grace shook her head in disbelief. I can't believe I didn't see it before, she murmured. Jack's tone softened. You were in love. That's not blindness. It's hope. Her eyes flicked toward him. You talk like someone who's been through it. He gave a short laugh, though it didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, my wife passed away 3 years ago. Taught me everything about what love really means before she left. For a moment, neither spoke. Just the sound of the wind and Tyler humming to himself. Jack finally said, Look, you don't know me, but I live a few blocks from here. There's a small diner on the corner. You should eat something, get out of that dress, and take a breath. Grace hesitated. You don't have to do that. I know, he said. But I want to. Something in his voice, steady, real, broke the last bit of her resistance. She nodded. Okay. And as they walked toward his old pickup truck, Grace caught a glimpse of her reflection in the side mirror. Mascara streaked, hair undone, but still standing, still breathing. And for the first time in years, she thought maybe, just maybe, she wasn't broken beyond repair. Jack opened the passenger door for her, and Tyler grinned from the back seat. Dad says everyone deserves a second chance, he said proudly. Grace smiled faintly, looking at Jack. Does he? Jack met her eyes. Yeah, and I think yours just started. The bell over the diner door chimed as Grace stepped in behind Jack and his little boy. Warm air and the smell of fresh coffee hit her like comfort she didn't know she needed. The chatter inside dimmed for a second. People always stared when a bride walked in, wearing a white gown smeared with tears. But Jack's quiet confidence seemed to shield her from every look. He gestured toward a corner booth. This one's always open. Best seat in the place. Grace hesitated before sliding into the red vinyl seat. The bouquet she still clutched looked out of place against the salt shaker and ketchup bottle. Jack sat across from her while Tyler climbed beside him, swinging his legs under the table. A waitress with kind eyes approached, her name tag reading Doris. Well, honey, I don't see brides here too often after noon. She winked gently. Rough day? Grace's lip trembled, but before she could answer, Jack said softly, She's had better. Doris nodded, pouring coffee into 2 chipped mugs. Then the pie's on me. Nobody should cry in a wedding dress without pie. Grace let out the smallest laugh, and the tension in her shoulders began to loosen. Jack waited until Doris walked away, then leaned forward. You know, people will forget what he said today. But you shouldn't. Not because he was right. Because it'll remind you what real love isn't. She stared at the coffee, her reflection rippling on the dark surface. You make it sound easy. He shrugged. It's not. Took me 3 years to stop being angry at the world. My wife, Lauren, she had this thing she used to say. Kindness is never wasted, even when it hurts to give it. Grace looked up. She sounds like someone I would have liked. She would have liked you, Jack said quietly. She had this gift for seeing light in people. Drove me crazy sometimes, but she was never wrong. The conversation paused as Tyler started stacking sugar packets, making a tiny fort. Dad, he whispered, is she gonna be okay? Jack smiled gently. Yeah, buddy. She's stronger than she thinks. Grace's eyes softened. You've raised him well. Trying my best, Jack said. Single parenting's a mix of duct tape, prayers, and bad coffee. She laughed, really laughed this time. The sound startled even her. It felt like air after drowning. The doorbell jingled again. For a second, Grace froze. Ethan's friends had followed her in. She saw them whispering, filming. Her stomach dropped. Jack noticed instantly. "Stay here." He stood, walked straight toward the group, and stopped just close enough to make them step back. His voice was calm, low, but carried enough weight to silence the laughter. "If you have something to say it to me." The tallest of them muttered, "Relax, man. We're just joking." Jack's jaw flexed. A joke's only funny when both people laugh. They hesitated, exchanged glances, and then slinked out the door. The diner returned to its usual hum. Grace exhaled shakily. When Jack sat back down, she whispered, "You didn't have to do that." He gave her that same quiet smile. "Didn't have to, but I wanted to. There's enough cruelty in the world. Doesn't need another audience." Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from relief. She hadn't realized how starved she was for simple decency. Tyler leaned forward, proud. "My dad's a hero. He helped a lady fix her tire once, and she gave him cookies." Grace grinned through the tears. "I think you just got promoted to two-time hero today." Jack chuckled. "Hey, I'll take cookies or gratitude. Both taste good." They spent another hour talking about everything except the wedding. Grace told him about her small-town bakery dreams, her love for painting, and how she'd spent so long trying to fit into someone else's idea of perfect. Jack listened, really listened, without pity, just warmth. When the plates were cleared, Doris returned with a slice of warm apple pie topped with melting vanilla ice cream. "How special," she said. "And sweetheart," she added to Grace. "You wear that dress like armor, not shame." Grace smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "Thank you." As she took the first bite, Jack's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It was his boss asking if he could cover an early morning shift at the auto shop. Grace caught the look. "You work nights?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Pays the bills. Tyler's got asthma meds. Rent doesn't wait." Something inside her stirred, a deep mix of gratitude and guilt. Here was a man who barely knew her, yet he stood up for her, offered her warmth, food, and dignity, while quietly fighting his own battles. When the bill came, Grace reached for her purse, but Jack stopped her. "You've paid enough for one day. Let me." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then I'll bake you something. A thank you." "Deal," he said, eyes softening. As they stepped outside, the evening air carried a quiet peace. Streetlights flickered against the glass. Grace turned to him. "You ever think maybe people cross paths for a reason?" Jack nodded. "All the time. Sometimes the reason doesn't show up until much later." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe today wasn't the worst day of my life after all." He held the door open for her, and Tyler waved from the truck window. "Bye, princess," he shouted, grinning wide. Grace laughed, wiping the corner of her eye. "Bye, Tyler." Jack tipped his head slightly. "See you around, Grace." And as she watched the truck pull away, headlights glowing against the dusky street, she felt something inside her shift, like a bruise finally beginning to heal. 2 weeks later, Grace stood outside the bakery where she'd once dreamed of working. The "Help Wanted" sign still hung crooked in the window. She smoothed her hair, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The air smelled of vanilla and cinnamon, sweet, familiar, safe. "Hi," she said, approaching the counter. I saw your sign. I, bake. The owner, an older woman named Mrs. Cole, looked up from a tray of muffins. You were the bride, weren't you? Grace's cheeks flushed, but she nodded. The story had spread fast. It always did in small towns. But Mrs. Cole's voice softened. Honey, I saw the video. What that man did. Cruel. But the way you walked out of that church. Brave. Can you start Monday? Grace blinked, smiling through a tear. Yes, I can. As she walked home, her steps felt lighter. For the first time in years, she wasn't trying to be someone's idea of perfect. She was just being Grace. Later that night, she tied her apron and began baking again. Flour dusted her hair, and laughter, her own, filled the quiet apartment. On impulse, she boxed up a batch of cinnamon rolls and scribbled a note. For the man who reminded me that kindness still exists. Grace. The next morning, she left the box on the counter of Jack's auto shop. When he came in, grease-stained hands and sleepy eyes, the note stopped him in his tracks. He smiled, a real full smile he hadn't worn in years. She actually did it, he murmured. Tyler peeked from behind a tire stack. Did what? Kept her promise, Jack said, handing him a warm roll. Try it. The boy's face lit up. We should take her some flowers. Jack chuckled. Maybe something less cliché, like a new set of baking trays. By evening, he'd found himself outside Grace's bakery, holding a small box wrapped in brown paper. He hesitated before stepping in. She looked up from the counter, surprise flickering into a smile. Jack, she said softly. You found me. Didn't have to look far, he replied. Town's been talking about your cinnamon rolls all day. She laughed. Guess I'm officially famous for something other than being dumped. Jack set the box down. Not dumped, reborn. That's what I'd call it. Grace opened the box and gasped. Inside was a set of professional baking tools, shiny and new. Jack, I can't accept this. Yes, you can, he said. Consider it an investment in the best bakery this town's gonna have. Her eyes glistened. You didn't have to. I know, he said quietly. But I wanted to. They stood there for a moment. Two people who'd both lost and found themselves in unexpected ways. As days passed, Grace's bakery began to thrive. She poured her heart into every pastry, every loaf, every smile she served. People came not just for the food, but for her warmth. She'd become a quiet symbol of resilience, proof that broken beginnings can still lead to beautiful middles. One evening, just as she was about to close up, she heard the bell ring. Tyler ran in, waving a drawing in his small hands. Grace, look, it's us. She knelt down, smiling. The drawing showed her in a white dress, Jack beside her, and a huge cinnamon roll in the middle labeled Happiness. Jack followed, holding a paper bag. He insisted on delivering this himself. Grace laughed softly. What's this? Dinner, Jack said. And maybe a question. Her heart skipped. What kind of question? He took a slow breath. You've been through hell, Grace. But you walked out stronger. I don't want to rush anything. Tyler thinks you'd make our table feel a little less empty. Grace stared at him, her throat tightening. Are you asking me to dinner? He smiled. Maybe more than one. For the first time since her wedding day, Grace's eyes filled not with pain, but with something new. Hope. That night, they ate at the same diner where they'd first met. The waitress, Doris, winked as she set down their coffee. Knew you two'd circle back eventually, she said. Tyler giggled, dipping fries in ketchup while Grace and Jack shared quiet glances that said everything words couldn't. Outside, the neon sign flickered, casting warm light on their faces. Grace looked at Jack. You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up that day? He smiled faintly. Then some fool would have walked away from the best thing he never deserved. She blushed, her heart swelling. Jack Lawson, you might be the kindest man I've ever met. He shook his head. Just someone who finally learned that real love isn't about perfection. It's about presence. Grace reached across the table, her hand brushing his. Then maybe it's time I learned that too. And his laughter filled the booth. The world outside moved on. Unaware that inside that tiny diner, a rejected bride and a weary single dad had just rewritten the meaning of love. Because sometimes kindness doesn't just heal hearts, it builds new ones.